Hey guys, it's Lucas, and today we're going to be doing something a little bit unusual. Today, as you can see from the case box, we're going to be building a computer. This is actually going to be my first time building a computer, but I have watched a lot of videos on stuff like this. So let's start with the case. Today we'll be using a Corsair 450D. It's a nice mid-tower case, as you can see here. So it comes with a glass screen, a medium-sized screen. It has, the front I/O has two USB 3.0, the power switch, a headphone jack, a microphone jack, and a reset switch. And also a little pop-out filter, which is easy to swap in and out. As you can see already just looking here, we have two 48 millimeter fans. Actually, two little foot screws, toolless. So to open them, I took those off already, and it just slides down and drops like that. Okay? And that reveals us to the inside of the case. We have 1, 2, 3 drive slays for 30 millimeter drives. And they're easy to slide back into. We have one rear case fan for the exhaust. Here, this case fits an ATX board, and it fits any size power supply. So today, we are going to be using, let's start with the small stuff. We have a 480 gig SSD from ADATA. We have two sticks of 16 gig RAM, so a total of 32 gigs of RAM. We have a Intel Core i7 6700K, so the unlocked version. We have the regular Windows 10 Home. And the star, we have our Asus Z170-A motherboard. To power all of this, we have a CX750M. It's a 750 watt power supply. To cool our CPU, we have a H1010i GT from Corsair. And one of the most important parts of our build is our graphics card. Today we are using a XFX Radeon R9 380X. Okay, so this is all of the gear we're using, except we're missing one thing, our keyboard and mouse. Today we have the Destroyer 2. It's a gaming keyboard and a gaming mouse. Okay, so now we're going to move over to the water cooler for our CPU. So as you can see, I already have everything prepped up. So how we install this is we have to install two fans onto the radiator before we can even decide on putting it into the case. So first you have to line up all the little screws and notches. This step is pretty easy. And then we take 4 of our long screws from the pouch that comes with it, and we go in a cross pattern. So now I'm just finishing tightening up everything. Everything seems all good. Okay, so the last and final step here for our cooler is to connect these fan headers into the headers. See here? They only go in one way. And they are a tight fit. See? And that one fit in snugly. You have to make sure these fit in nice and snug, otherwise your fans won't work. And that won't be fun if your fans don't work. Okay, both of them are in. You hear like a little click. That's how you know your fan headers are properly installed. Okay, now we have our Corsair 750M power supply. This we're going to install onto our case now. So we take the regular power supply, and immediately you can already see, if you see on this side here, there's already a slot for the power supply. So in this case, the power supply goes onto the bottom. In most cases, you see the power supply comes in on the top. But this case, there's an exception. That's because if you check the bottom here, you have a vent. You can use the bottom power supply to ventilate air. That's why they put it on the bottom. Okay, so now if I put this upside down, so you can see the pass sticker, and then you take it from here, and you push it in and make sure everything lines up. Okay? See, if you look very carefully, you can see that screw. That means your power supply is properly in. From here, you have to take the packet of screws that came with your case. Okay? You'll see the case came with a few zip ties for cable management later. We'll look on that later. Okay? We have our motherboard standings, right? These are all for motherboard. We have, here we go. Here are the power supply standings. There are 4 screws. And last but not least, we have our graphics card standings. Okay, so from this point, you take your power supply standings, and you make sure you have all the holes lined up. I see all 4, and that means we're good to go. Okay? Now finishing up tightening everything. This process is kind of the hardest almost, because it's kind of hard to get the screws in the right places. But after you do that, you're set. So this is one key thing that will help us later on. Take our 24-pin connector. This connector goes directly into the motherboard. This is the motherboard power, and this is the CPU power, as it says right there, right? CPU. So take your 24-pin and your CPU through to the rubber garments through your case, on your case. Almost all cases have these, and the reason is, if I turn the case around, see these sticking up? I can pull them in, and when I want to connect them, I take it from here and connect it into the motherboard and the CPU. Because if you have it in the front, you're gonna have the worst cable management you could ever have. Okay, from this point now, we are going to mount our water cooler. This is actually a very complicated step because you need to get the radiators in the right position to mount. Okay, so if I put this to the side, the easiest way to have this done, when you tilt your case over, always make sure your cables aren't in the way, because the last thing you want is a connector breaking. Okay? I take the case and put it lightly down on its side. Right? This is how we're going to have to mount the case, the water cooler. Because it's much easier, because here, if you have this case, you have these magnetic meshes that go on top. If I put this aside, on the top here, you have your mounting points for your radiator. Or if you're not going with water cooling, you have your parts for your fans. Okay, so let's get right into mounting our water cooler. So the first thing is, you should make sure that when you buy one of these, you have to make sure that they are compatible with your case. If they're not compatible with your case, you'll have a bad fit or you'll ruin the airflow in your case. And both of these are very essential to have a good running computer. Okay, so we always want, never touch this. Never ever touch the thermal paste that's pre-applied. If you touch it, you ruin the chance of proper cooling. Alright. So now that we've put the water cooler in, you have to try and level it and match the holes on here. This could be a tricky process. See, I already have one here. I have to try and match all of them. This could be a tricky process sometimes because you can have this screw cut off and then you have to make sure you have the bottom screw also. So this might take some time, but don't get frustrated. The more you get frustrated is the easier of a chance you have to break your radiator. Okay, so now we're on our last step with the water cooler. Just tightening everything, making sure everything is in place. A strategy here we can use is after tightening everything, move the pipe to the side. Otherwise, it'll interfere with what we're doing next. We're going to be setting up the motherboard. While we're setting up the motherboard, we're going to have to put in the processor, one of the key elements in building a computer. So over here, we have our motherboard, the Asus Z170A. Right? It's a very nice board. It's pretty expensive, but for what you're getting, it's worth the price. Okay? So keep this down here for now. And a very good tip to use is to use your motherboard cover as a building platform. So another key thing you have to do before playing with your motherboard is you have to deground yourself. This might sound a bit silly, but the best way to do this is to rub a piece of metal like on your computer case. So literally, any hand you're going to touch the motherboard with, just rub your hand like that. Easy. Okay, now we can move on to our motherboard. Never touch any of the little pins on here because that makes a bigger chance of you shorting out the board, and that's the last thing you want. Okay, so here we go. We have a little cover for the Asus 7 series cover. If you look at our I/O, we have a DVI, we have a VGA, we have a HDMI, we have a DisplayPort, we have two USB 2, we have two USB 3.0, we have the printer and mouse cable, we have an Ethernet, we have a USB Ethernet, we have a Type-C connector, which is on these new models, and we have our audio section. Okay? So on our motherboard, we have our PCIe expansion slot. We have a SATA Express, the new SATA Express, which we're not going to use today. Okay, and here we have our RAM, which, matter of fact, we're going to be installing too. Okay, so so now we are with the motherboard. First thing we're going to do is we're going to install our processor. This is one of the most expensive pieces of your build and the most important. So first, we're not gonna do first with the processor. We're first gonna take off this retention arm and reveal the pins. Never touch these pins. If you touch these pins, you could break your motherboard, and that's the last thing anybody wants to happen. Okay, so now I have my i7 in my hand. You have to slowly open up their easy release cover and grab by the corners. And you can see all the pins on the bottom. Okay? Here, you see this bottom triangle? If you close your thing, if you look here closely, you see a gold triangle. You see a black triangle. That's how you know where you have to put your CPU. So now, I know which way I have to put it. So now, slowly and very carefully, just drop it into place. And it should fit in, right? Now, slowly close, and you'll hear this noise, but it's fine. It'll, see? And then your little cover will pop off. Now you know your CPU has successfully been installed. Now, we're going to move on to RAM. On your motherboard, check your user guide and it'll show you which slot you put your RAM on. On this motherboard, it is they're divided into two corridors. This corridor is A, this corridor is B. So it says to put one stick on DIMM A2, which means the gray one on this one, and one on DIMM B2, so this gray one on the second corridor. So if I take my RAM, which I have G.Skill Ripjaws, and then these only go in one way, so you have to be careful. And you slide them in, and you wait for that click once you get it in. Sometimes it's hard to get the click. I think, nope. Okay, now we'll move on to the next RAM. Okay, same one, but this time we put it on this one. Okay? Okay? And now our motherboard is ready to be put into our PC, into our case. And another important thing is, this is your I/O shield. This is what goes onto here. But except you put this on the case, which we are going to do now. So if I take this, we want this to pop out. So you can see it now here. Here. Now that I know, this is the setup. Okay, so there's a bunch of wires that came with your motherboard, you must be asking. So, and this is for when you have more than one graphics card. This is to connect them together so that you get more performance. Now, these cables we'll be using today. These are your SATA connections. These go into your graphics, into your SSD, or if you're using a hard drive, it goes into that. That's what we'll be using today. And that's all the cables that come with our motherboard. So I think that means it's time to put our motherboard into our case. So maybe again, we should do our routine so that we don't have any static electricity, right? Okay, so now once again, very carefully, only touching the contact points, we lower our motherboard in. Okay, so now I'm lightly dropping the motherboard in. And here, as you can see, this case has the standoffs pre-installed and one separate one to make your life a lot easier. Okay. So now back to the cooler, our CPU cooler. I have installed 4 standoff screws that will be used to mount the cooler. If you look at the back, we put this plate. This plate is for the Intel boards. So this is our graphics card. It's a nice XFX, right? As you can see here, we have our power input, right? And yeah, so this most graphics card. Yeah, this is all the chips under. Okay, most graphics card. Here are all the connectors: the DVI, 2 DVI, and 1 HDMI, and 1 DisplayPort. And most graphics cards use PCIe, so PCI Express ports. And our motherboard has 3 PCI Express ports on it. This gray one, this black one, and this last black one. So we're gonna be using the second black one, right? So step number 1 is try not to touch the bottom of your graphics card. This is the most delicate part. It's like your processor. You don't wanna touch the bottom. So first we have to remove this, the two nearest to our PCIe port, and then we'll be fine. Now that we know that our computer is finally set up, I did some cable management in the computer. I say I did a pretty good job myself. So we have our power supply now connected to the wall, and I booted it. So if you see, you can see all 4 of our case fans are spinning. So that's a good thing. So if we go over here, we have our BIOS. These BIOSes, since it's an ASUS board, are very easy to use, and it's a lifesaver. So I hope you guys enjoyed, and this was my build of a $2,000 Beast gaming PC.